Hi, I'm Sam Landsman from Slowboat.com.
And I'm Laura Domela from Slowboat.com. Today we're going to be talking about packing and provisioning for extended cruising in the Northwest.
Some of the broad strokes here to start out. Your habits from home will probably transfer to what you're doing on the boat. So if you're really into cooking elaborate meals at home, you'll probably continue that on the boat.
Yep.
If you're a couch potato at home, you'll likely continue
be a boat
that on
potato.
the boat. So think about that as you're planning your trip.
Also, like the things that you eat, the things that you wear. At home, if you tend to wear the same stuff over and over, you're going to do the same thing on the boat. Don't bring stuff that you never wear because you envision some different person that you'll be on the boat. You won't. You'll be the same, and you'll end up bringing home a ton of stuff you've never touched.
Remember that there's stores along this route. You don't need to be bringing enough food for a 3 or 4 month trip. You can purchase stuff along the way. And related to that, remember that you're going to have to probably clear customs at least once or twice, depending on where you're starting and where you're ending. So you can look at our customs videos and you can learn more about what kind of food items are prohibited from crossing the border. But just remember that you're going to have to take food across the border.
Okay, let's talk about clothing. We separated this out into inside the boat and outside the boat. Inside the boat, it seems like it's always about comfort. If you're in the boat for a long 8-hour day of cruising, you're not gonna put...
I confess I have worn a bathrobe for an entire day of boating and never gotten out of the bathrobe.
Loungewear, jammy kinds of stuff. You put them on in the morning to get up and make coffee, and then you get underway, and why bother changing? My slippers are comfy, you know? And so really it's about that kind of thing. There's no need to dress up for a boating day.
This assumes that you're in a power boat and you're inside.
Correct.
If you're in a sailboat, there's a good chance that you're going to be wearing foul weather gear a good chunk of time.
Right. And so then we'll move to our what to wear outside the boat. Waterproof pants, waterproof jackets. If you're sailing, you're going to have your foul weather gear on. If you're going on excursions, going out on the dinghy, and it's raining, you're going to want that stuff on as well.
Yeah, and I find that waterproof pants are really important, no
Yeah.
matter if it's rainy or not, because a lot of times if you're out in the first half of the day at least, and you want to sit down in your kayak or your dinghy that's been outside, it's got dew on it, it might have water that's accumulated overnight, so it's really nice to have waterproof pants so your butt doesn't get wet every time you sit down.
And rubber boots will be your best friend. We like Extra Toughs, of course, but...
Extra Toughs are those brown and beige boots that are popular in Alaska. They're called Alaska sneakers, and people wear them everywhere in Alaska.
And it's a really good way not to look like a tourist.
Yes, if you're wearing the Extra Toughs around town and you walk past the jewelry stores or the people that are hawking stuff to the tourists, if you're wearing Extra Toughs, they will ignore you.
Well, remember we walked past one of the cruise ship tour hawkers, and we had our Extra Toughs on, and they said, locals only discount. Like, it worked.
Interestingly, for some reason, the Canadians have their own brands of boots that they prefer, and I've never seen Extra Toughs for sale in Canada. Comfortable walking shoes are also important. I like getting off the boat and going hiking. I like walking around towns and getting some exercise when I'm there. So something that's comfortable, that doesn't need to be super waterproof, but something that has good grip and is a comfortable walking shoe.
Our normal hiking shoes for home, when you're in Alaska and it's raining a lot, they'll get pretty muddy. And so you want something that's comfortable to walk around in, but also easy to clean off. If you've got something with a whole lot of grippy ins and outs and mesh and whatever, like the hikers we have for the trail at home, it's a little bit different when you're constantly getting them muddy.
Layering can be really important, especially if you're going out on longer adventures outside. So if you're going to go for a hike or take a long dinghy ride, it's nice to have different layers that you can add or subtract as needed.
Right.
So that you are comfortable no matter what the changing weather is, if it gets warmer or colder, or the sun comes out, or rain starts or stops.
Yep.
And I really, really like merino wool.
Yeah, me too.
It's soft, it is comfortable, it breathes well, it doesn't get stinky like synthetics do. And some of the time it's hot when you're out hiking. Not so much necessarily in Alaska, but if you're in Desolation Sound or the Broughtons or parts of the central coast of BC, it can get hot. And it's nice to have clothing that breathes well. And this is not your grandpa's wool. This is not a thick wool, warm wool jacket.
It's like technical wool.
It really is very comfortable even in hot weather.
Yeah, we've got a couple of merino wool t-shirts that are thin, soft t-shirts, and they're just great for that.
Yeah, cotton is not a good option. It's comfortable when it's dry, but when it gets wet, it's cold and uncomfortable and it doesn't dry well.
It stays wet. A hat and some gloves are nice to have. It'll get cold. If you're crabbing or anything like that where you don't want your gloves to get wet, then those Atlas lined waterproof gloves are great. They come in all sizes and all different kinds of linings and removable linings and whatnot, and they're fantastic.
I should have brought some gloves with me last year when we took the dinghy up the glacier in Glacier Bay, and we were in the dinghy for several hours. And
yeah.
Even in the summer, and it was a beautiful sunny day, with the wind coming off the glacier, it was still pretty chilly.
I like those wool fingerless gloves too with the thinsulate lining. I've got 2 pairs of those, and I wear them a lot, more than I thought I would.
And don't forget your swimsuit. For hot springs, for one thing, but also occasionally it does get warm enough to go swimming, and if you're going through Desolation Sound and later parts of summer, it's certainly warm enough to go swimming. And a swimsuit is a good thing to have on board and a good thing to have guests bring when they come and visit.
All right, let's talk about pharmacy stuff and first aid. One of the things you want to think about is if you've got prescriptions, make sure you get them filled at home, because if you're an American, you can't get them, right?
Yeah, if you're traveling outside of the U.S., that includes Canada, or a Canadian traveling in the U.S., Puget Sound or Alaska.
Right. You can't get them refilled.
Right. You need to have a local doctor, and there are occasionally exceptions that can be made based on emergency type things.
But it can be a pain in the butt.
It's a whole lot easier to get prescriptions filled at home when you have your normal pharmacy and your doctor available and so forth.
Also, it's a good idea to see your doctor before a long trip. Our first trip up was about 4 months, and we went and got a checkup and got prescriptions that we filled at home for antibiotics and pain meds in case of emergency.
Yeah, you can be in pretty remote places, and it's not necessarily convenient or even possible to get to a medical facility quickly. And so imagine if you've had a serious injury, you've gotten a finger caught in a belt or in a windlass or something horrible like that. And
it takes you a day or two to get
It's not urgent enough to call for a helicopter, but it's painful enough that you want to have some serious drugs on board to combat that pain while you're in transit to the nearest healthcare facility.
Well, and last year when Kevin broke his wrist, we were at home, but we thought about, okay, what if this had happened in Ford's Terror? We didn't have SAM splints, and now we do. Mm-hmm. That's also a really good thing to have on board. Yeah,
REI sells really good first aid kits that are designed for group travel out in the wilderness and when you don't have access to medical care for days or weeks at a time, and I recommend carrying one of those. Buy the biggest one you can fit in your boat and look through it with your doctor and think about what other things you might want to carry.
That's a good idea.
I know some boaters are increasingly carrying AEDs, automatic external defibrillators. Those can be very helpful if there's a cardiac issue, but the patient still needs to go to a hospital quickly. So it's not something that you shock somebody and they're all good. They still have to be transported rapidly. Wilderness First Responder is a really good class to take. They're available through a number of agencies, and you can Google and figure out when you can take a class in your own city, but they really focus on how to make the best use of materials that you might have at hand and also decision making. So if there has been an incident or an accident, what kind of steps you should be taking and what kind of injuries require immediate care versus treating it in the field and waiting until you're somewhere where it's more convenient.
Okay, we can get into food now a little bit. Food, it's just endless. It depends on what you like and all of that. We tend to do a fair amount of cooking food at home and vacuum sealing and freezing it for the times that if we do a bunch of barbecue or pulled pork or stuff like that. It's great to just stick in the freezer if you've got the room for those times when you don't have something or if you feel like having your own barbecue or whatever.
I find that even when I'm on the boat, the galley is small compared to a home galley. You're working in limited space, but you have a lot more time typically to prepare meals. And so I spend more time cooking when I'm out on the boat cruising than I normally would if I were sitting at home.
Mm-hmm. We've brought along a few times those simmer sauces like this little mole guy that are good for quick meals. Tortillas are super versatile.
Think about what you can do without electricity. Think about how you're going to power various kitchen appliances. So if you cook most of your meals in a microwave, how are you going to power that microwave when you're sitting at anchor? Do you need to run your generator to do that? Can you do it through the inverter? Do you have an electric galley that you have to run the generator to use the stove or the oven? And plan accordingly if you don't like running the generator all the time.
So if you're cruising with other boats or on a flotilla, it's
or in the Broughton.
Or in the Broughtons, right? Or a place where there's very heavily focused on happy hours and group get-togethers. It's great to remember to have a lot of different things on board to contribute to potlucks and happy hours. Munchy items like chips and salsa, crackers and cheeses, cookies, stuff that you can make up. Like if you have smoked salmon and cream cheese and some capers, you could make a little smoked salmon dip or whatever, stuff like that.
Yeah, think about things that are easy to make and that you can carry in bulk easily. So I often take Ghirardelli brownies from Costco.
Yeah.
They take almost no time to make.
Well,
they bake for
in our oven.
They bake for about 45 minutes and they're always popular. I never seem to get any back to the boat afterwards.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty easy to carry crackers and cheese and some kind of charcuterie, salami, whatever. Mm-hmm. Things like that are good. Also, if you fish, we really like having a vacuum sealer on board. After you fillet up your king salmon, you can put it in the freezer.
Yeah, super useful. So things that you might already have or might not, just for preparing food, barbecues can be really handy, especially when it is hot outside and using an oven or a stove inside your boat throws a lot of heat into the interior. And so there's several companies that make marine barbecues. Dickinson seems to be the best that we found. The Magmas and the Kumas are too hot.
Yeah, our Magma we had was either off or volcano.
Yeah, there's no middle ground. And
we have the little Dickinson CBQ now, and we went back and forth between the big one and the small one, and we ended up with the small one. It's plenty for us, even when we have another couple on board.
you can do all sorts of things on the barbecue. You can pizza and veggies, fish, steak. You can make bread even on the barbecue.
Also, speaking of pizza, I know both of us have added pizza stones to the insides of our oven. So we cook a little more evenly. And
the Force 10 propane ovens and stoves, and I found there were a couple issues with it when you were trying to bake. For one, they don't have very even heat distribution, so things burn on parts of the pan and not in others. And the second problem is they don't have much insulation. They don't retain heat well, so when you open the door to put something in or check something, you lose half the heat and it takes forever to get hot again. So the pizza stone really evens out the hot spots and also holds the heat well, so when you open it, you don't lose everything.
Right. It's funny, we have one in our Airstream, and that oven is okay, but I just stored it in there for a while and then realized that the oven did a lot better with it in there.
You can get a lot of shelf-stable items in advance and stock the boat up. I go to Costco every year before leaving and fill the boat with pastas and rice and crackers, and they even make bread that comes in vacuum packed.
It's essential. The sourdough.
Yeah, it's Essential Baking Company. They make several varieties, and the stuff lasts for months, if not years.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool. One time when we were at Pierre's, he did the big shrimp and crab, and everybody brought side stuff, and we brought a couple loaves of garlic bread, and it was so nice to be able to just whip that up.
Yeah, it takes almost no time. The bread is par baked, so you just throw it in the oven for 10 or 15 minutes, and that's it.
It's also nice to think about keeping things on board to prepare lunch while underway. Easy things like sandwiches or soups or something.
Booze can be a big part of boating, for better or worse. And if you like drinking fizzy water or tonic or gin and tonics or vodka tonics or other sodas, SodaStream can be really helpful. Basically, make your own fizzy water,
seltzer water,
or tonic or whatever. And the device is much smaller than if you were trying to carry a
bunch
weeks
of 1 liter
or
bottles
month-long supply of sodas or fizzy waters or tonics. So they're super helpful. Make sure you bring enough cartridges, the CO2 cartridges, if you buy a SodaStream.
I think one cartridge makes 60 liters of fizz, depending on how...
It's like a week of drinking.
I know. Well, not for fizzy water, but yeah, maybe. But they last pretty long. I'm trying to think of how many we had with us last summer. Maybe 3 or 4. But we drink a ton of fizzy water.
Think about how the packaging is and how you're going to deal with the garbage. So beer in cans is a lot easier than beer in bottles to deal with. And you can get some good beers in cans now. Fremont Brewing, Alaskan Brewing both offer cans. And wine in boxes, I call it cardboardo, is much easier to deal with than wine in bottles. It's not fragile. You can have a cup or glass or several glasses or whatever. You don't have to worry about it going bad once you open it, really.
Yeah, we don't ever have it at home, and we've experimented a lot and tried a whole bunch of different ones because it's definitely more convenient. And the 3 that we've found to be palatable are this Vieille Femme, the Big House in BC, Copper Moon is pretty good.
Remember, a lot of these places you're going, they don't have any garbage facilities. They don't have any garbage man to come take away whatever you've created. So you have to carry it with you on your boat for sometimes upwards of a week or 2.
Yeah.
And then once you get somewhere, you have to figure out how to get rid of it. So having it cans that are separated, bottles that are separated, burnables that are separated.
Yeah, in Desolation Sound and the Broughtons, you want to keep your burnables and your plastic and your glass separate. Burnables are often free to get rid of because a lot of places have a little burn area where they get rid of their own trash, or you can burn it yourself if you're on a beach somewhere where it's appropriate. Glass can be recycled, but in some places I want to get rid of my trash and it's got a $5 per bag cost to get rid of it, which can add up if you've been saving it up for a week or 2.
Think about what kind of appliances you might want on board and what not to have on board. There's single use appliances like this hot dog. I don't know what this thing is. You gotta eat a lot of hot dogs to make that worthwhile. But it doesn't make sense to have a device on board that serves only one purpose unless you really, really like that.
And you have room.
Right. And think about how you're going to power it. A lot of cooking appliances are generating heat. That is a huge electrical draw typically. So you might be able to power it for a short time off your inverter if you have one. But often you're going to be at anchor and you'll need to fire up the generator to, say, use a waffle iron or something like that.
Speaking of waffle irons.
Yes, we found lots of uses for the waffle iron on the boat.
Yeah, the waffle iron gets to keep its place on the boat.
It seems like a very specific item to have on a boat, but you can make hash browns or brownies, cornbread.
Waffles, of course.
Waffles, yeah.
I mean, we don't use a blender very often, but at home I like to make soups sometimes. I like to do homemade Caesar dressing, and I usually do that in a little mini Cuisinart. But On the boat, I just bring a little stick immersion blender and it works great. Also, I've got an electric pressure cooker that I brought with me last summer. I wasn't positive it would stay, but I think it's going to stay. It's really good for making a big batch of risotto, say, or cooking up some chicken breasts for use in salads and tacos and whatever. And it's pretty good, but you need to have AC power for that.
I like to ask people if you have to start your generator in the morning to make coffee, because that can get old quickly.
Yeah.
So it's nice to have something that you can make coffee without electricity, or make sure that you have enough electricity on board so that you can make coffee in the morning without firing up the genset for that really short time. And it's not good for the generator, and it's irritating your neighbors potentially. And
you don't want to have to wait to have coffee until you're underway.
So French presses are great, although I seem to break a couple of them every year. They fall on the ground and shatter.
When we used to backpack, we had a little Lexan French press we would take with us. It was pretty cool. Maybe you need one of those.
Maybe.
All right, let's talk about where to get supplies.
So my best advice is buy fresh stuff every time you have the opportunity.
Yes.
You never know when the next place to get fresh produce is going to be.
You see zucchini and broccoli and you really want that, get it.
As long as you can eat it before it goes bad.
Exactly.
But the
cabbage is a thing that lasts for quite a while on the
forever.
Produce. Yeah, it's
Melons
great.
last pretty well for fruit, and they don't often need refrigeration. So think about berries are kind of tough, and some of the lettuce can go bad really quickly.
Get a good recipe for some different slaws to make with cabbage. We bring an extra cooler for the bulkier produce when it overflows and doesn't fit all in the fridge in the boat.
So if you're south of Cape Caution and the inside of Vancouver Island, grocery shopping is relatively easy. You can get at Campbell River and Powell River and Port McNeill and Port Hardy and several other destinations along that coast. But once you get north of Cape Caution, it really gets tough. And so before you go north of Cape Caution, it's a really good idea to do a big marketing at the supermarket, either in Port McNeill or Port Hardy. Get as much as you can for the next few weeks as you work your way up towards Prince Rupert. That's where the next supermarket's going to be. Although Shearwater and Bella Bella, which is kind of smack dab in the middle of that area I just described, is pretty darn good for provisioning.
Yeah, it's surprisingly good.
And Shearwater has the grocery store, and then Bella Bella, which is a native village just across the way, about a mile and a half away.
By water taxi.
Yeah, water taxi or dinghy.
Yeah.
Has a bigger grocery store. But remember, the smaller the town, the smaller the stores generally are.
Right, and deliveries, depending on what day you show up, you might be the day before the delivery, in which case your selection will be very limited, because deliveries can be kind of weekly.
Right, and if you're the day of the delivery, it might be mobbed with people who are all trying to get the eggs before they're all gone.
Yeah.
Prince Rupert has big time facilities. They got a Safeway and a Walmart.
Well, most major towns in Alaska have supermarkets too,
and then
right?
once you hit Alaska, you're back into the Safeway and IGAs and Walmarts.
Juneau's even got a Costco. I know we've done that a few times.
Typically, I tell people you're not going to go more than a few weeks at the very most between decent stops at provisioning places.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Rental cars can really help when you're doing a major reprovisioning or in one of the bigger towns where you can't necessarily walk everywhere. But in Southeast Alaska, they can be booked up far in advance and hard to find and expensive. And I've actually found, this is a little bit out there, but you can rent a U-Haul pickup truck. There's a flat fee plus a per mile fee. And the thing in Alaska is there just aren't very many roads to drive on. So even with a per mile fee, it doesn't end up being very expensive.
No.
And the cruise ship passengers and the people who have flown in don't ever think to rent a U-Haul truck.
Well, they might now.
But it's a good way to potentially get a rental car if you don't have a reservation, they're not available.
Also, we've met people who had rental cars and were super generous and offered to let us tag along on their errands. And that's also a really nice thing to do if you do happen to get a rental car or a U-Haul pickup, to check with your neighbor and see if they need anything.
Right. And both the Walmarts in Ketchikan and Juneau have free shuttles that go from the cruise ship areas up to their store, and they don't check to see if you're actually on a cruise ship. So it's easy enough to hop on one of those.
Just don't wear your extra tufs, because then they'll know.
Propane. A lot of us cook with propane on the boats, and that can be a little problematic. Make sure you carry enough for wherever you're going to be cruising. Refilling them can be kind of a pain. I've spent half a day at times running around town
and
carrying
you've
a
got to carry,
propane tank.
Right. We have one of those little carts that folds up flat like a little briefcase kind of a thing, and it opens up. Our propane tank fits perfectly in there. And so that's really nice, because when it's empty, it's not a big deal. But when it's full, it's a little bit of a pain if you have to walk a half a mile with it.
Right.
And so having a little cart works great for that.
Make sure your tanks are certified. Once the tank, I think it hits 12 years old, it needs to be recertified. And that can be done in Seattle at Sure Marine, other propane outfits around the state. And the recertification is good for, I believe, 5 years. But if you take the tank with an expired certification in, they may not fill it. And then it's
that would
really
be a bummer.
inconvenient. And marine tanks are expensive.
Yeah, because then you wouldn't be able to get it recertified and you would have to buy a new tank.
Right. And then that's a hassle just to go and buy a new tank anyway. And a lot of boats nowadays have these fiberglass tanks, which are kind of neat because you can see the level. They're translucent. They're a lot lighter. They never corrode. But there was a company that went out of business. They had built defective tanks. They went out of business. They couldn't afford to pay for the replacements of all the tanks that they had ever sold. And there are a lot of places that I found that simply will not fill fiberglass tanks. They don't know that a lot of the fiberglass tanks are safe.
Right, so they just made a blanket
They just
rule.
have a blanket no filling of fiberglass tanks. So as convenient as the fiberglass tanks are, they're not necessarily the best answer because you might not be able to get them filled where you're boating.
Also, they're cool little adapters to use if you happen to run out of propane and you use those 1 pound bottles with your barbecue grill. You can use the adapter to use those little 1 pound bottles with your regular propane system.
Yeah, I normally carry 3 or 4 of those 1 pound bottles for the barbecue.
Right.
And I put them in the propane locker with the main tank. That's important so
Yeah.
that you don't have a fire hazard or explosion hazard. But it's kind of nice to have the adapter so I can plug the 1 pound bottles into the main propane system in case there's ever a leak in the system and I dump all the contents or I forget to fill up or use more than I expected or whatever. It's just nice to be able to, in a pinch, use the 1 pound bottles for the main boat's propane system.
All right, and now let's talk a little bit about books and movies. You've got a Kindle. Kevin and I each use iPads or iPhones for reading, and it's great because you can bring all of your books, and it's super easy to download more if you run out. You're not bringing a stack of stuff that takes up room on the boat.
Yeah, I'm totally sold on the Kindle for boat use. It's so easy to carry as many books as you want. If you can order more books. The batteries last just about forever, it seems like. The biggest downside, though, I think, is that you can't swap books with other cruisers. That's kind of a fun part of boating. A lot of laundry rooms at marinas and other
book library exchange.
And so that's kind of a fun part that you miss out on. But the benefits, I think, way outweigh that.
Yeah, agreed. Reference books, I like print versions
rather
than having PDF. And I know you can search a PDF if you're looking at it on your iPad or something, but I like the book.
It's nice to have a book that you can flip open and leave open to a page and look at it as you're coming into an anchorage or whatever.
And you've got a lot of movies on a hard drive, don't you?
Yeah, I have a bunch of movies and TV series that I keep on a hard drive that's accessible on the boat network. So any device logged in, whether it's mine or a guest, they can download an app called Infuse, and then they can log onto my boat network when they're on board and they can stream movies or TV shows or whatever.
That's super cool.
And it's really helpful with guests on board.
Yeah.
They can just sit in the bunk and
especially
watch whatever
kids,
they want.
if they get bored. You gotta have a couple of good kid flicks
And
on
so
there.
I'm going to do an article for Slowboat that goes into more detail about how I have that set up.
Great.
But
I want to do that.
It's really nice to have 300 or 400 movies and TV series and all that just at your fingertips.
Right.
And be able to queue it up at any time on any device.
Also want to maybe think about business things that you might need to take care of while you're gone. We carry a really small little printer and some stamps and a few envelopes because we've at some point in the past needed those things, and so now they stay on the boat and it's super handy. If your tax guy sends you a thing you need to print out and put a check in the mail, you can do that from wherever you are.
Well, thanks so much for listening. We appreciate you taking the time. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. You can post comments below this video or email us directly.
And thanks for joining us. To see more of our educational boating videos, subscribe to our Slowboat YouTube channel. If you're on Facebook, you can follow us at facebook.com/slowboatlife. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at slowboatlife. And of course, you can always find us on slowboat.com. Until next time, see you on the water.